Hello. Gurdjieff tells us always to be inwardly free. But can you be inwardly free? To be inwardly free means that you are either in the collected state or in the solar plexus. And that is possible only if your tri-am as a kamno functions reasonably. To be inwardly free is possible only if there is a lower order functioning within your organism, if the energies are collecting correctly in the solar plexus, then there is a place to be. And if you can be there, then you can be free there. In society, people talk about being free all the time, as if it is possible for anyone to be objective. And the sense of it is that to be free and to be objective is when nothing happens. But in fact, to be free and to be objective is when the right thing happens. The right functioning. When you are a channel for the universal forces. When you function correctly. When you perform being particle duty, and then shared with you is the freedom of the source. In society, as they spiral away from the source, as the heptaparaparshanok of dissolution spins ever faster, they're looking for a different kind of freedom, removal from existence. Gurdjieff talks a lot about Buddha. I'm only going to cover a few things here. He also talks about Tibet and the teachings of St Lama there. From Gurdjieff, Buddha gave the following instructions. One of the best means of rendering ineffective the predisposition in your nature to crystallize the consequences of the properties of the organ kundabhafa is intentional suffering, and the greatest intentional suffering can be obtained in our presences by compelling ourselves to endure the displeasing manifestations of others towards ourselves. Gurdjieff says that this instruction was misinterpreted in two different ways. One was by the Buddhists, who practiced this instruction in solitary, but the instruction was to endure the displeasing manifestations of others towards ourselves. How can you do that in solitary? And Gurdjieff further mentions that without the presence of other people, there are not the physico-chemico emanations to work with. That there is actually a material provided by other people towards us which we can transform. And I would say furthermore that suffering must mean feeling pain. If you do not feel pain, then there is no suffering. So the many Buddhists who have long faces and big eyes because they have been staring at a wall are numbing themselves out using concentration, which is part of the ordinary hunting mind that we all have. And in so doing, they are going precisely nowhere. They have these long faces, stone-faced. I'll speak later about how I understand the correct practice of Vipassana, which is quite different from this. Eventually, Gurdjieff saw in Tibet monks who put themselves in cells and lived there trying to suffer as greatly as possible. And when they stopped receiving food from the hatch, the next monk went in there and pulled the previous man out by his ankles and took his place unto death. A couple of other quotes from Gurdjieff. And it seems that Saint Buddha said to them, "You three-centered beings of the planet Earth, endowed with the possibility of acquiring your own functioning of both fundamental sacred laws, have also the full possibility of coating in yourselves this most sacred particle of the great all-embracing everything existing, and of perfecting it to the required degree of divine reason. And this great all-embracing of all things is called holy prana." So here Gurdjieff is making a reference to prana as the material that coats our bodies. And he says, if this most sacred prana is crystallized in you, with the conscious or unconscious participation of your I, you must without fail bring the perfecting of the individual reason of this totality of most sacred atoms to the required gradation. Otherwise this most holy coating, changing from one exterior coating to another, will suffer and languish eternally. Now this is very interesting, because in terms of practice on the fourth way, it is absolutely impossible to achieve your goals simply by coating, or simply by doing practices mechanically that so many people do. For instance, people try to work with perceptions or increasing energies and stuff like that, conscious labors and intentional sufferings, which also coat your being. But unless you bring this coating up to a degree of perfection of individual reason, the coating will suffer and languish eternally, which I assume means that part of you will suffer. Now, Gurdjieff talked about the astral body not being permanent. The implication of this for practice is that whichever practices of the fourth way you do, you have to enter the identity. And you cannot do things mechanically, neither in the fourth way, neither in any other tradition. You have to become something. It's not that you have to coat yourself. Coating creates a substance, and then you have to enter it with your identity and the higher reasoning that comes from it. And that new identity is passed by transmission, from feeling it from your teacher. It's very difficult to understand what that really means, a higher identity, without receiving it by transmission, feeling what he feels. And Gurdjieff continues about Buddha. The precise explanation of Saint Buddha was well understood by his contemporaries, and many of them began to strive with eagerness to absorb and to coat in their presences the particles of this most great greatness, and afterwards by this means to make manifest divine objective reason. But when the beings of the second and third generations following Saint Buddha began wiseacring with their peculiar reason about his explanations of cosmic truths, they introduced for future transmission the definite notion that this Mr. Prana is already in them when they first see the light of day. Thanks to this misunderstanding, the beings of that period and of all subsequent generations, including the present one, have imagined that, without fulfilling any being particle duty, they are already particles of that most great greatness, as Saint Buddha himself had so specifically described, according to them. In Buddhism, the practices are quite intense, and there is a lot of light and transmission inside Buddhism even to this day. And I think particularly because the practices are solitary, they don't involve other people, there is an opportunity to be by yourself and to explore inside in a way that's very valuable, and they're very forceful. So there is a lot of good there. But what kind of creature you create through Buddhist practice is a different question, it's certainly not going to be a balanced creature. So if I go back to those Western Buddhists with these long stone faces, there is an idea that there is no personal self in Buddhism. In which case, why are you practicing? Who is there to practice? Who is there to be enlightened? And so on. What would be the meaning of any of it? That's just stupid. And a lot of human spirituality is stupid because intelligent people are busy working. And stupid people and retirees are those that have a little bit of fun that they call spirituality. There are not that many people in conventional spirituality that are intelligent. Now the next thing about Buddhism is the Four Noble Truths. There is suffering, there is cessation to suffering, there is a path to that cessation, and that path can be taught. Those 4 steps. These are certainly not coming from Buddha and were invented later on, which is not a good sign. Another thing that is not a good sign was that in 500 BC there was the first council of Buddhists in order to agree on the teaching. That's already a sign of degeneration. Although I note that at that first council, all the men there were self-realized and that women were excluded, which also shows that they adhered to the caste system and that it was elitarian. It was not egalitarian. It was not for everybody. It was elitarian. In terms of the idea that there is suffering, what is suffering and who is suffering? If we live in a world of perishing, does that mean that we suffer? Is that it? I don't think so. The perishing world, the world of samsara, of cycles, there's no reason why there cannot be a beautiful life. After all, can't a holiday be beautiful? Or a job posting, can't that be beautiful? Can't a relationship be beautiful, even if it all comes to an end? So there's nothing wrong with samsara. And in fact, as everything is alive and everything is burning, even at very highly refined levels, even God is burning, is transforming, then everything is samsaric. Everything comes to an end. So the perishing of this world is not the problem. It is Maya that is the problem, which is the mad state that human beings live in because they are a fallen creature. It is the fact that they are fallen, or that they have created a rhythm of operation that is for themselves horrific. That is suffering. So there's a confusion between samsara and Maya. So if the Buddhists are trying to escape from samsara, that's an error. They should only try to escape from their fallen state, meaning from their low functioning. The next misunderstanding is about equanimity, which I suppose means indifference to emotional fluctuation. But anyone who doesn't feel is dead. So that's also a wrong understanding. If our emotions cause us pain because they fluctuate, then why do we